Dan started beekeeping in 2011, and so I kind of consider him a bit of a contemporary. He's always more fashionably dressed than I am, which is always a point of frustration. But yeah, really excited. He's now kind of a neighbor of mine, sort of half an hour, 45 minutes up the road in the Kawarthas. So really looking forward to hearing how Dan's set up his new honey house.
Hi, everyone. It's been a while since I did one of these presentations at an OBE meeting, so I'm excited and nervous at the same time. Okay, so I'm just going to run you through, as Steve mentioned, the way I've been kind of treating my setup for a honey house since I started keeping bees. I got involved with bees in 2011, but got my own hives in 2013, and I've been doing that since. Okay, so as Steve mentioned, about 400 hives. It's pretty well focused just on honey production, and everything that we produce, we pack and sell either to wholesalers or in a retail, lots of small shops, hospitality, and restaurant supply. And when I say we, the business is myself and then also my wife, Steph, who definitely didn't want to be here today to talk about any of this, but she had a huge part in setting up almost everything I'm going to talk about over the years, as well as in our everyday operations too. I think it's important to note here that it's just the two of us. There are no employees in all of these different settings. I've either worked and beekeeping has been on the side, or we haven't really had been in a position where we could have employees easily in terms of facilities, that sort of thing. And yeah, towards the end of what I'm going to talk about, I'll explain the honey house that we are currently in the midst of building at our place. But as you'll quickly see, there's never been a honey house for me to work in anyway. So everything's kind of been conjured up from different experiences and what I've been exposed to over the years. So I think a huge part of how beekeeping has gone for me over the years is benefiting from connections and friends that I have. For about 10 or so years in beekeeping, I rented a house from Brian Lacey, a beekeeper that he's out near Ottawa now, but still in the house. And so my landlord was always very friendly and forgiving towards all of the messy aspects of beekeeping in both the garage and the basement. Allison owned that house before then, so I think that got grandfathered in a bit too. But up in the top right corner there, that's me extracting at Devon Ron's place. Top left is working with Tom Congdon. He gave us space to operate in for a couple years, which really helped us grow. And then I don't have one here, but Les's place, both in Holstein and Drumore and Chatsworth, I got to benefit from extracting and doing bottling as well. This is the garage in Guelph once I bought some of my own extraction equipment that we could use to extract in. I didn't include a photo of the basement, but it's as dingy and full of stairs as you can imagine, carrying all the honey up and down. And then the photo at the bottom right there is 4 or 5, maybe 6 12-gauge extension cords running from all these different all these different outlets in the house and the outside of the house that ran into that garage. So there's been a lot of sort of jerry rigging to the extraction setup, and the basement didn't look any different. And so I really have to be grateful for the fact that I had workplaces. Oh, also I extracted the tech transfer office for the first couple of years as well. So I've had lots of workplaces where people were generous with the use of their space and letting me use that. At one point, Les told me that one of these days I'd have to ante up and actually, build a space of my own, take on the big capital cost of building a honey house. And I prolonged that for a lot of years, part of which I did with shipping containers, which is going to be the main thing that I'm going to try and talk about here. So once I switched to only working just on bees myself, not working for anyone else, what we decided to do as a solution was to come up with a temporary solution at my dad's farm, which is in the Kawarthas. He had lots of space there, and he was more than happy to give us space on the land there to work with. So we ended up using 3 40-foot shipping containers. I think it's important to note that they're high cubes, so an extra almost a foot higher than just a standard one. And they never actually were supposed to stay exactly where they still sit, so everything was a bit temporary in the way that they were set down. If I was to redo it now, I would definitely grade the area, insulate under the standard shipping containers. One of them is a reefer that is insulated all around and in the floor as well. But the other 2 are just standard. And although they were spray foamed on the inside, there is no insulation in the floor, which has been a bit of an oversight. I wish I had done that originally, but that was never the plan anyway. So we have those 3 different essentially rooms that are containers. One we used for an extraction room, one we used for a hot room and storage, and the other for bottling and therefore storage as well. And there are a myriad of other, van bodies and enclosed trailers and stuff that hold glass and boxes and all sorts of other things. As everyone in this room knows, beekeeping is so inherently stuff heavy that you end up having to store all sorts of things for every hive you have. There's a number of supers as well as all sorts of other extra equipment there too. That bottom photo shows the cheapest deck we could build. It was just a free deck online, and then we kind of chopped it up and set it in place so that we had decking run between all the different containers, and we placed commercial doors within the backs of each container as well, so that we could have free movement from each container and their intended purposes. The decking isn't quite as extensive as I really would like it to be. We did end up having to use a lot of ramps, and we decided to buy a loader to be able to move barrels of honey as well as full honey from one container to another in other ways as well. But that deck idea worked quite well to be able to actually roll honey off the truck down into the hot room container, and then also, out of the hot room into the extraction container. The way that we heated these were with heat pumps. So we could heat during the cooler months heat during the cooler months and warm the honey as best we could. It only sort of did a good job because of that lack of insulation in the floor issue, as well as keeping the extraction room warm in the actual well-insulated one. Where we placed the commercial doors, especially in that one in the foreground of the bottom shot, that's where a reefer unit sat that we kicked out and then welded doors in. We're able to find relatively inexpensive double commercial doors online that have a steel frame so that we could weld them right to the container. And in other ones, we just cut holes with a grinder and welded them in place. And then something we never had in terms of electrical, it was actually just kind of dumb luck that we ended up near a hydro line running along the edge of the property. So for only like $250, we were able to get hydro out and hook up a hydro mast right onto that one container. Ran a panel and conduit inside, and then buried and pony paneled all the hydro in succession from that first container over into the others. If I was to do this again, they would be all connected, and the hydro would be just through one wall into the other, if not doors cut between them. And we never had running water. These containers are nowhere near the well on that property. So we ended up just getting totes from the closest municipal water setup, and then buying portable sinks. So a portable sink, there were tons of them that companies and stuff purchased during COVID that were all self-contained with a reservoir, a waste reservoir, a pump, and a hot water heater in the bottom that we were able to buy secondhand and have actual running water in our facilities as well. So I got a photo of unloading supers off of the truck, either with a lift gate setup that we decided to ditch because of its precarity and move towards like a van body loading ramp that worked quite well. photos of us welding up and cutting holes in the containers to add those doors, which really were integral, both from a standpoint of accessibility, being able to move things in and out, as well as keeping things bee tight. That was one of the biggest challenges we had, was making sure that containers actually got to be bee tight. So the big double doors that they come with are great for securing things, but there's no real way to close yourself into them, I think, from a safety perspective. And so, yeah, the double doors or the welded in doors were very important to be able to actually keep these setups bee tight. And even then, you got to worry about gaskets around the doors and that sort of thing. Me moving barrels in the top left photo there. That I included that to really highlight that there's a lot of space and there's not a lot of space at the same time in a container. When it's empty, it feels like you've got 40 feet, and with the spray foam it's a little less, but say 8 feet inside, and it feels like a lot. But it can be challenging to maneuver stuff around within, and without the doors, you also end up you end up burying everything that goes in and not being able to access it until you empty everything else first. Yeah, the bottom photo there just shows supers being warmed and the electrical conduit being run over top of the spray foam. And then the top right photo there is the extraction setup. So you can see everything is in like a linear fashion. There's only a few feet. There's just enough space between the crank for the extracting line to wheel the empty supers out from the far end of the container. And we could fit a maximum of 5, sometimes 6 stacks of supers right inside the door there that had been wheeled over across that deck. So you were limited in extracting, if they're 6 high, 30 to 50 supers at a time before everything had to be reshuffled about and empty stuff brought out and that sort of thing. So again, storage and moving everything in, trying to use this big long space, but then also being really tight in terms of width and being able to access. So in the off season, we were storing all of our barrels on one side and then as many supers as we could indoors. But the reality of it was, which is great wax moth prevention, is that most of our supers have been stored outside or in containers. So we would just put a queen excluder underneath and a lid on top, and they'd sit outdoors all winter. And then I thought I'd highlight the fact that, yeah, we ended up having to, the way we poured barrels off, a bulk tank at the far end of the container, we would open up the double doors that are standard on the container and pour barrels out of that, and be able to lift them with a loader from one container over into the other to have them stored. But then when it comes time to have to warm a barrel, then you have to lift it out of that container again and move it into the warming container. So that top right photo was our setup for packing the honey. So warming the barrels, filtering it, and then into a bulk container or a bottling container to work with. So really, I think what I'm getting at is, we had all the components of a building set up, but without the fluidity of being able to move within a space and with a lot more inefficiencies. And I could give a whole giant presentation just on setting all of these up, but I'm supposed to be talking about honey house design anyway. I've seen enough PowerPoint presentations where people try and put a video in and it never works. And I always said I wouldn't do it, but I do have a video that I'm going to see if it will play. And if not, we'll just skip it. Not going to play. Either way, there was a video just showing in detail the way that the extraction setup was. But as you can see from this perspective, this is looking in at the door. The portable sink is straight in ahead of us, bulk tank at the back that you would open up the back barrels to, or the back doors to pour off barrels and move them. And then the entire extraction setup, which is a Cowan 28, with a spinner, was along the right-hand side there. So you could just squeeze in around and work within there. And we extracted a lot of honey through this over the past 4 or so years. So the other year, I guess a couple years ago, we ended up buying into one of the family farms that belonged to my grandparents. And there was nothing on that property. It was just a vacant farm property that was always used for cattle or for hay. But us taking it over. We are going to build a honey house on it, which is kind of a long process. We had to bring service to it. We had to drill a well, all that. So it's been a couple years in the making. But something Mike mentioned, grant opportunities. Once we had the opportunity, that was kind of the catalyst that we decided that we were actually going to spend the money to put up a honey house. And really, all of the main components in the honey house design that we were looking into were influenced by all of our past setups. So we mostly just considered all of the negatives of the garages and shared space, exposure to all of the good setups that people with honey houses that were generous enough to give us their perspectives on and the use of their space too. We tried to incorporate in there. I did have plans of touring as many honey houses as possible last winter, and it just never materialized. And I recognized that I had a bit of a privilege working at Tech Transfer, that I was constantly visiting all these different beekeeping operations and seeing honey houses. But at the time, I was never really paying attention to the details of it. So I did try and phone as many people as I could to kind of talk through what they did and what they like. There's lots of information on YouTube and Facebook groups and forums about what to do when you're planning on building a honey house. The overarching comment that people give you is that you should just take whatever you want to do and build it 3 times bigger than that. That's like guaranteed what they say, which I understand what they're trying to get at, but it's frustrating because anyone doing that is in a position in their business where they've outgrown it. So they don't have maybe the same budget that someone that's trying to build something from scratch has. But either way, that was always like the main comment, is build it bigger, build everything bigger. And especially the hot room. The hot room was definitely one that I kept on being told, you want to have that bigger than you think you need it. Food safety was a big one that we wanted to keep in mind. The reefer container was relatively decent in terms of food safety, like wall cladding and that sort of thing, but still running water was provided by a tote outside with a rigged up water pump and pressure tank that we would just run in with a hose and spray down. Actually, the reefer container specifically was really nice for that because it has these ridges on the floor that you could just kind of wash everything away and out the back doors. But that was a big one. And then, of course, the biggest design influence beyond experiences and asking people questions was the budget we were working with. And so I got a couple friends' honey houses here that were big help in answering some of the questions that we had and giving us some guidance. I can take no credit for actually making any of the layouts. Steph made probably like 24 different layouts to kind of accommodate all sorts of different things. But one of the main things was we wanted to take the size of building that we decided we'd build, which was 50 by 70, and have degrees of segregation between the different rooms. So, and we kind of did this in 2 stages. One, building like a bee-tight shell, and then secondly, using a grant to build segregated rooms for controlled access environments, is what they call them. We wanted things to be quite efficient so that everything connected back to the warehouse, where there was a loading dock as well as door, like a main door that you could drive a bee truck into, but that they could all be accessed through overhead doors, and that we could load honey coming into the hot room, which is the top left room. That hot room would flow into the extraction room, which is quite long, and that you could access from one side and have a point of exit for empty supers on the other side and out into the warehouse. A bathroom and a utility room, which especially a bathroom was something we always missed operating in containers. And then a separate room for storage and bottling. So to have a proper space because everything is packed and all the pallets that comes along with glass and that sort of thing, we really wanted to have space for bottling as well. But when we were creating this design and the layout, it really felt like we were doing giving a whole bunch of space to the hot room, which I was a little weary of making so big. But after lots of discussion with people, we definitely decided to scale that up. And I kind of like the idea that your hot room is also an opportunity for you to have a bit of a workspace and storage space when it's not actually being used for its intended purpose as well. Similar to Mike and Eric as well, in-floor heat was something that came highly recommended. And after having lots of crystallization in our previous setup with all of the bottom 2 or 3 supers in a stack crystallizing on us because there was no insulation, cold temperatures, and that sort of thing. One of the main things we wanted to do was be able to heat the stacks from the bottom up and have the heat rise through the hot room as well. So this is a work in progress still. The electricians are just finishing up what their work is in here this week. But yeah, heated floors were one of the main things. In terms of wash down and having like food safe cladding, originally we had looked at truss core, but decided that steel sheets were most economic. The center photo there, we decided to build it, although not with a big footprint, as high as we could. So we ended up doing tall ceilings and deciding that we'll aim to stack things quite high. But then in the main production areas, the hot room, the extraction room, and the bottling room, just doing well, it ended up being shorter than we meant for it to be, but 9-foot ceilings. So we're not losing space in those production areas, and we gain a mezzanine up there. And then the loading dock, which is you can see in the foundation there, is just on the side. We kind of hummed and hawed over the loading dock and decided that although that loading ramp that Henry Cornelson put me onto worked extremely well off the back of a truck onto the deck between the containers, that in the interest of us moving forward and maybe actually hiring help, a safer option is to have a loading dock that we just sized to our current truck, and we can always put more gravel down or dig more gravel out if we decide that it needs to be different. So that those are the construction elements. When it came to design, one of the main differences, rather than having extension cords running all over the place, we would size everything appropriately electrically. So we decided we'd run conduit on the outside of the steel and actually, write out the amperage and the wattage for the electricians and have them put the appropriate breaker and line running directly to overhead wiring that comes straight down onto the extraction line. And same with the bottling setup, having it actually sized electrically to accommodate the different heating elements and that sort of thing. Something that's going to be new to us with this is operating with pallets. So it might not happen this year or next, but I'd like for us to move in the direction of unloading pallets and pulling honey onto pallets, maybe rather than super pallets with a cart. And so we did decide to try and lay out the extraction line in such a way that we could just squeeze a pallet all around the extraction line, doors that would accommodate pallets running between them, and be able to run full pallets in and full pallets or empty pallets out with ease. And part of that, of course, was overhead doors, as well as man doors into the key production areas. And then growth was a big one that we kind of, like Mike was saying, it's kind of a weird, we're at a weird size to try and decide how much growth you want and how much growth you don't want. In terms of a store, for example, that's still something that we're kind of debating and having the public, at your place. But in terms of growth within the actual design, when it came to laying the in-floor heat, we made zones where there were no radiant heat lines, so that if we did decide to scale up and do a larger extraction line, there would actually be voids in the concrete where there are no radiant lines that would accommodate a larger line. And same with the placement of the honey house in the field that we put it in. We tried to put it far enough away from the property line and from conservation area where you could expand and do some sort of lean-to or extension. That was also part of the height of the building decision. But that, it doesn't have to rely on that growth happening to make it function and work for us. So there are a couple notable lessons so far. And I think if I was to revisit this next year or the year following, after we've actually seen how things turn out, I'd have a lot more to say. Similar to echo what Mike was saying, I would not hire the same contractor, but I think that's often the case with people. Some people it seems to work out with, other people not. Probably our biggest challenge in getting started, we weren't under the same time crunch because the containers are still there and set up and we could always go back to them. But getting our permits in place was really challenging. The city of Kawartha Lakes is known for being semi-resistant to people doing much and trying to go against the grain of what they're used to. And it took us quite a few months to get our permit in place because a honey house is kind of this weird gray area to at least our municipality between being a farm building and being a commercial building and being a retail space. And we just didn't fall into a category. And so there was a lot of back and forth with the city. When it came to the septic, we only have this small bathroom and a few sinks, one in the bottling room, one in the extraction room. And they just couldn't seem to come up with a way for us to have a septic system that would be affordable and easy. And instead it ended up being really oversized, and they ended up making us build it in accordance with our actual square footage, which was irritating. Yeah, I guess that's all I can say about that. Timing with the bee season. Les had told me early on to plan it all the winter ahead because it ends up taking a tremendous amount of your time, not just in planning, but during the actual build. It was really, really challenging. And like, even though you're not doing all of the work, there's still a lot of like mental exhaustion and effort that went into planning it. And something I didn't really see coming was like trying to translate. We're so in our world in the beekeeper in arena that we don't really realize how obscure and abstract beekeeping is to your average person. So trying to explain things to the different trades involved was really challenging, especially bee tightness. So the two photos I've got here, we didn't really ever think about how the steel on the outside of the building would impact being a bee tight space. But the soffits that we ended up with have these it looks really nice from outside, but these 3/4 inch holes that's just asking for bees to move in on. So I've ended up stapling screen over the entire length of the building up in the rafters there. It'd be a different story if we had decided that we would spend the money to insulate the whole building, but that's not in the budget for right now. And so, it's just an uninsulated space that we'll hopefully insulate down the road. Another point on that, translating what we're doing to trades is at one point I said, well, we want to get the hot room up to the high 20s or 30 degrees or something to get the honey real warm. And so I feel like a lot of the emphasis that the gas fitters, the guys in charge of the radiant floor and the boiler, were focused on trying to get it up to that high 20s, 30-degree temperature. And so I feel like we actually spent a lot of our heat lines focused just on that hot room, when even just a bit of heat would have been sufficient, but I just didn't think about it. And then, in terms of mounting equipment into the radiant floor, we spent a whole weekend, it felt like, taking measurements of where all the heat lines when they're before the concrete's poured go into, in our case anyway, this foam with little knobs in it that the PEX line runs through. And we took endless notes and measurements, and have since found that thermal imaging gun, you can detect them pretty easily anyway, but just in case, for establishing where the void was, where we would actually be mounting down equipment, was really important. So we wanted to lay that all out and be prepared. And then one other note on the bee-tight construction, again, because we didn't insulate, the ridges of the steel, like the profile that, it's got like 2 or 3 bumps, and that was a perfect invitation for bees to come in as well. So we've ended up being up in the rafters and spray foaming every gap in the roof that had I just thought about it before, we would have used that foam that, anyone doing steel is familiar with. It just wasn't a consideration until after it was on. And then, because I mentioned before, we were starting from scratch on this property, we had a lot of things to consider going into it and a lot of timelines that had to, a well is pretty expensive. Bringing hydro is extremely expensive. And so it's something that we've been chipping away at to kind of work towards actually putting a honey house up. And then other things that I hadn't really considered is that, like, we have to have a laneway we already had a laneway, like a farm laneway on there, but a space for construction vehicles to turn around, but as well thinking about, the sugar syrup truck coming in and having to have a large enough space for the sugar syrup truck to turn around or glass deliveries to come in. It's all part of that budget that is outside of the actual building itself that's going to end up being something that we have to work on. And then finally, one of the last things that we really considered was whether, the first, or when I first got into bees, the TTP Intro to Beekeeping manual had a section all about honey house design. And one of the key points was to build it so it would be forklift compatible. We decided that in the storage side of things, we'd make it forklift compatible, but then in the production areas, we would just be happy with pallets being able to run in and out. And if we ever got to a point where a forklift had to operate in a production space, then that could be, we'd be spending money in another way to expand. So that's all I have to say about honey house design.